Hello and welcome to another episode of the AAIM High Podcast, standing for Asian American Aspires in Management. Today we have a special guest, my very own Uncle James. James Shin is the president of film and television for HYBE America and its Scooter Braun subsidiary, SB Projects, where he has worked for several years, most recently serving as executive vice president of film and television. In his role, James oversaw all content development across film, TV, digital, audio, and Broadway, contributing to projects like FX's Dave and Netflix's Excuse Me, I Love You. He has also worked with several big names such as BTS, Justin Bieber, and Ariana Grande. His leadership continues to drive the expansion at HYBE America, and we are lucky to have him as a guest on the podcast. So, to start off, could you maybe share a little bit about your childhood? What was it like growing up in an Asian immigrant household, and what values were instilled in you by your parents?
Hey, Ben. So I was born and raised in Chicago, son of a Korean immigrant. My mom, your grandmother, had moved here in the 70s, and I was born in the 80s. And, she met my father. My father had passed when I was younger in age. So it was really, my childhood was her taking care of me, my older brother, who is 8 years older than me. So, there's a considerable gap there. But it was really growing up in an environment where, we were constantly hustling and working and figuring out how to not only make ends meet, but honestly, how to be great. And, as you will find with a lot of stories about immigrants and kids of immigrants, the theme of kind of working the extra 10%, the extra 100% to be able to outbattle and to out-succeed people around you, that was constantly in the air. So that's the kind of environment I grew up in, which was like pretty intense, where the stakes were high, because if we didn't achieve what we needed to achieve, then we were considered, failures and not being able to kind of reach the echelons of society that we aspire to, and which was the reason why people came to this country. So with all that came a lot of hard work and diligence and consistent diligence at that, so good schooling, good homework, well-rounded kind of language acquisition, practicing your music or sports, and always kind of having whatever it was next kind of already in mind. That long-term visioneering is something my mom had to have to instill in for us, because that's what it took. You couldn't just kind of have the normal things that a normal kind of well-to-do childhood in America would afford you.
Yeah.
So we couldn't afford to just be, doing our thing and just looking for the next day and playing video games and going to the movies, and it just wasn't like that. So
Yeah. And how did you handle that, pressure to succeed while growing up? Because, it's so hard at such a young age to just be thinking about your future and, succeeding.
Yeah. I think that's done. It was hard. I think, at the same time that we're doing all of this, we are reminded of our values. Like, we're trying not to be unkind. We're not trying to be taking things for granted. We're not trying to be entitled, because, again, we can't afford to be. So I think really to maintain sanity, and because you are a child ultimately, and essentially we're still growing and forming even through our college years, right? We're all still learning and growing. I think really for me it was like, enjoy what I can do in the moment, and thankfully, my mom had identified something where I was actually good at something, and to be honest, it felt good to be good at something, and so being able to perform on the stages that I was being able to perform, I realized not every kid could do. And, relish in that fact, right? Like, have some fun with that. Wherever you could find fun, like, that's where I kind of took solace. And honestly, I also, like, bred a real independent spirit. Like I found ways to satisfy myself, which was
Hmm.
I really enjoyed watching movies and found ways to watch movies, and so and television, right? And so that seeded an early interest of mine, which clearly bore fruit later in my career because that's what I
Yeah.
do now.
Hmm.
Yep.
Yeah. And how did your parents, like your mother's experience as like a immigrant to America, influence your perspective on work and success?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's twofold because I see it as um, being extremely helpful and additive to my daily um, ability to get things done and
Mm.
to execute, right? Execution is the key.
Yeah.
But I also, there's a flip side of that where you enter a workplace and it doesn't always have to be business. It can be, the medical field, the law field, or whatever,
Hmm.
consulting, where you're dealing with a diversity of opinions and a diversity of ecosystems. Now,
Hmm.
especially when you're starting off in the real world, how do you reconcile with the fact that not everyone believes or has experienced the same philosophy that you were part of? So, um, you know, being able to have perspective in working with people who may not believe in the intensity, work driven mentality and do, by the way, just as well, right?
Hmm.
Um, or people who have just a different framework for work process, like, it's not always about um, kind of performance driven metrics, right? Sometimes it is more, depending on the personality, about um, the setting that you cultivate, the vibe that you cultivate, kind of the shared understanding and mission, and less so of the hierarchical vibe. Being able to work with all those kinds of personalities is really important
Yeah. And
in
as we
that.
move on, yeah, as we move on to like your education and early career, because education plays such a huge role in shaping one's career, can you maybe walk us through your journey through maybe starting at high school at Phillips Academy Andover through college?
Yeah, I got into Andover as a scholarship student, and was grateful and thankful for the scholarship I was given. Music was a huge portion of that, so I did a
Hmm.
ton of music, extended my piano and violin studies there. Conservatory orchestra. School gave me, it's a very unique school in that it gave me opportunities to tour China, Turkey, Greece, perform with Yo-Yo Ma, Bobby McFerrin. I mean, it was just like incredible, right?
Hmm.
My educational experience at the time, as I was going along with it, was kind of simple in high school. Like I knew, and whether that's because parents tell you or you're just in that environment with peers and college counselors and all that,
Hmm.
but the goal is to get to a good college, right? It's a stepping
Yeah.
stone to a good college. The whole life skills, long-term stuff, the network that you cultivate, like that is something I've come to appreciate much later in life
Mm.
because honestly, I have more ties to my high school base in terms of consistent conversation now than I do, for example, in college. But at the
Hmm.
time, the goal is to get to college. Now, how do you get to college? Well-rounded applicants, the base level of great grades, and like something that stands out about you extracurricularly. So I knew that.
Hmm.
So I continued with the music. I did a lot of kind of volunteering, community service, and that ended up being something that really, to this day, instilled this idea of kind of helping others, where you don't do it just to do it in vain, but because you really do care about people. And that's something that colleges can sniff out, right?
Hmm.
But it's like grades, extracurriculars, and honestly, being able to speak coherently and cogently about um, being a good person and what you offer to the world. I think that's really what my high school experience gave me.
Hmm.
And then as I got into, thankfully, a great college, um, it was similar in that they really leaned on me for music, because music was a big part of my application.
Hmm.
Um, but in college was actually where I had the bravery to step outside of my music zone and start exploring what would life outside of music be.
Hmm.
And that's where I started, really using my networking abilities, and getting an internship in Hollywood and doing various things here and there, New York, LA, and starting to cultivate kind of a path that felt different from what my expected path was at that
Mm-hmm.
time. And so in a liberal arts environment like Princeton gave me tremendous opportunity for that. There was a
Mm-hmm.
lot of openness for me to explore what I wanted to explore.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't always, and Princeton's known to be, the school of kind of future world leaders and, top people in their fields. But that doesn't necessarily mean it has to be restricted to a certain set of professions. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
thankful for my college education to give me that grounding to then figure myself out in the real world. So,
Yeah. And
yeah.
how did you figure out like that path that you wanted to do? Like how did you want to diverge from music and do
Yeah.
something else?
It was really initially it was so remember when I talked about how I grew up in like movies and shows.
Yeah.
I was thoughtful about it. Where's that coming from? Now,
Mm-hmm.
maybe primarily there's a sense of escapism. The fact that, and you know this, we've been to movies together. You go to a movie, it transports you to a different world for a couple hours in your day, in your life. You can feel something else. You can have fun and enjoy being in a different world.
Mm-hmm.
It's also a craft that combines all the artistic crafts, right? So like camera, sound, acting, music, all of it, costume design. And I love that idea that it is a craft that brings all of this stuff together.
Mm-hmm.
And that at the end of the day, it's storytelling, that we can tell stories. And that's all we're doing on a daily basis amongst each other. We're just telling stories to each other, even in conversation.
Mm-hmm.
So, so being able to nurture that initial interest, combining that with kind of the networking kind of muscle that I built at
Mm-hmm.
college and high school, honestly, afforded me my first kind of non-music experiences in the working world through those internships. And then I
Mm-hmm.
was able to bring that back to college and take classes that um, allowed me to further explore other interests. And then gave me the tools to, I think, go out to the real world. Where even though when I went out in the real world, I didn't have the exact like blueprint,
Mm-hmm.
I actually had the skill set needed to go where I need to go.
Yeah. And how did you get that first internship through networking, and how did that evolve for you then getting your first job? Yeah.
That was literally there was a time, and I think there it still exists, but there's like an email listserv, and an alumni had reached out and on the listserv saying, "Hey, anyone who wants to work in Hollywood or who has an interest, email
Mm-hmm.
me your resume." Literally just email back.
Mm-hmm.
So so networking in that respect means I literally was just signed up on a listserv. That was
Mm-hmm.
networking. And then I
Yeah.
replied on the listserv. And then I met with him, had a good phone call, and he got me an internship as a 18-year-old to work at a production company for a pretty big movie producer.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that got me in the door, and that got me a very legitimate notch on my resume.
Yeah. Then what was your transition like from that internship to your first job out of college?
William Morris is in New York. All the action was in LA. I knew I had to be in LA. I
Mm-hmm.
convinced my then girlfriend, now wife, to move to LA. Um, I was at William Morris for a couple months, and they allowed me to find a new job while I was doing that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I really wanted to go to LA to make movies, so I worked for a production company, but honestly, it didn't work out. It wasn't the right fit, and so I was a little bit jaded by that and having a moment of, you know what, was this the right move? Do I want to do movies? Like what am I doing?
Mm-hmm.
So I actually had these odd jobs in between, like producing music or like being an assistant to Bruno Mars before he became famous, or just like these random things that, by the way, ended up being very fruitful for me later on.
Mm-hmm.
You can see there's a recurring theme in my story here, but I eventually landed a job in television music. So
Mm-hmm.
that means music that you hire for television shows. You hire composers, songs, any song that you hear in a TV show, someone like me did that. So I stepped into a role like that, worked my way up that from an assistant to an executive. A few years into that role, I had another come to Jesus of, I didn't move to LA to do this job. Like I didn't even know this job existed until I came to LA.
Mm-hmm.
I came to LA because I wanted to make movies. How do I get closer to that? Now, here's where networking comes into play.
Yeah.
Again, I was already in the Sony system. And even though my job was far, far away from the movie creative job that I wanted, at
Hmm.
least I was under the umbrella of the company, and I had to figure out how can I get to where I needed to go. And I found it, and I found it through um, a gentleman who at the time was president of Sony Pictures. Another side story is that I was helping his family throughout the years, kind of tutoring and coaching his kids. Never asked him for a favor, but one day he asked me, "What do you want to do? You've helped us so much."
Hmm.
He landed me an interview with a guy who's current chairman of Sony Pictures, but at the time had just been chairman of Fox Studios. He had made Titanic and Avatar and just a legend in the game. And
Wow.
he had left to start a new studio under Sony. He had not hired anyone else. So he met me through this great referral, looked at my resume, and I just remember he was like, "What and why am I meeting a television music executive when I'm trying to hire a proper film creative?" And
Hmm.
so again, this is kind of life lesson, like not everything is supposed to be expected. And I had to create a story and a narrative about why this meeting made sense and why he should hire me.
Hmm.
It took a while, but he hired me, and that then started my course of my journey of legitimacy toward becoming what I wanted to be for real in
Hmm.
LA, which is a film producer. So he hired me at Sony and did my thing where I worked my way up there too, up to a certain level. I wasn't quite. I was only a mid-level exec when I left. Um, but I got to work on a lot of legitimate films, some
Hmm.
successes, a lot of them not, but learning lessons, right? And
Yeah.
so now when I'm in this job of kind of legitimacy, uh, people like Scooter Braun, people like Troy Carter, who managed Lady Gaga at the time, because my niche I had also created, again, narrative being the
Hmm.
key, because my narrative was I was the guy who knew music driven things and work with music talent. I
Hmm.
that became my like subgenre of specialty. So then now that I had that specialty, that was my network. Um, I kind of pounced at that, and when Scooter actively reached out with his colleague, um, I had to take the meeting, and it was like sort of a kind of a dream come true moment where I was like, oh wait, like this is an opportunity where I can be utilizing everything I've been doing and
Hmm.
now step into a producer role instead of a studio executive role and move from a big studio like Sony to something a little more upstart and entrepreneurial like Scooter, who
Hmm.
had by that time had already proven himself, many times over, but was a tremendous opportunity to grow and to start taking ownership of projects. And you see my name on the credits of like Dave and Neon and all these shows that you reference in my bio.
Hmm.
Um, it's because I stepped into this role and I was able to build them. So
Yeah. So now as we move on to more about like your current career, as a film and TV producer, executive, and entrepreneur, can you explain maybe just exactly what your job at HYBE America is right now?
yeah,
Like what exactly you do?
yeah. Very simply put, it's I make content. So whether you call that film, television, podcasts, documentaries, content of all forms, shapes, and sizes. Now, originally, when I started SB Projects in 2016, it was more of let's make television shows, let's make movies. But the
Hmm.
business has really diversified. It's eclectic. What I really do is, from on a day-to-day basis, is find the talent and find the money, put them
Hmm.
together so that you can make it, and then you find the distribution so that someone can see it. So
Hmm.
again, it's like taking the idea and turning it into reality. So it's taking dreams, turning it into reality. Like that's literally my day to day. Not so
Hmm.
dissimilar from, founder of a startup or a VC trying to get something off the ground to help a founder get his vision realized. I work in all those capacities
Hmm.
where either we will continue to build great films and television shows. I would love to make Wicked one day. I would love to make Gladiator one day. I'd love to make Game of Thrones one day. I already made Dave, a successful TV show.
Hmm.
And then there's the other side where it's like you're actually also funding content. So it's like, um, in Hollywood, you call that a studio. If you're a studio, you have money to kind of fund content and make opportunities come alive through funding because at the end of the day, money talks. Ideas
Hmm.
will forever stay ideas if they can't get funded, right? So
Hmm.
um, that's another realm that I operate in.
Hmm.
And what's unique about our company is that there's this whole synergy with Korea and international. They are the company behind the biggest group ever, BTS.
Yeah.
So how do you navigate that and work with Korea and synergize with what they're doing, being a part of that mission? How can I help with my unique skill set? That's all part of it all. So, and that has been a new part of the job that did not exist when I was at SB Projects.
Yeah. So adding on to that then, like what does like a regular work week look like for you? I'm sure it
Yeah,
differs from week to week, but
yeah.
right now at least.
A lot of talking,
Mm-hmm.
lot of when I'm not in production, meaning not kind of on a set, making a show or a film. A lot of talking because I have to generate business, I have to maintain business, I have to sustain business, and I have to be consistent with my partners who are in business with me, and constantly fielding potential new partners. So it's
Mm-hmm.
meetings, it's calls, just endless every single day. I mean, you know how hard it is to get on my calendar. That's not
Yeah.
out of disrespect for you. It's just a reality of how I have to operate. And yes, I have a team, but I also don't believe in just kind of like fully delegating, like I think it's kind of like a balance. So,
Yeah.
um, and as long as I am in this entrepreneurial mode, like I don't feel successful yet, like
Mm-hmm.
I still, even despite all my accolades and bona fides and whatever, like I'm still on my journey and having a lot of fun doing it. But at the same time, it's like, if it requires this constant churn of hustle,
Mm-hmm.
I'm down. It's
Yeah.
kind of it's in my
It's in
DNA.
your blood.
Yeah.
Yeah, and your career has been quite remarkable, especially one highlight, like you mentioned, was the show Dave. So,
Yeah.
what was that experience working on such a huge scale and like such a popular show, working with some really talented and famous people?
Mind blowing, honestly. Like I can't tell you, like it was one of the first shows I sold at my new job at SB Projects at the
Mm-hmm.
time, 2016. To see it finally premiere in 2020, to then being on set with Brad Pitt, who was like a childhood hero, and seeing, it premiere in 2023, him premiering on the show as part of the season three finale, and then hanging out with him, one day at a different premiere. I mean, it was really mind blowing. It's kind of like my dreams realized kind of thing,
Mm-hmm.
kind of moment. I think the day to day minutia of making a show like that, super super hard. It
Yeah.
really tests your patience, your will. You're managing hundreds of people, and it's not me managing them per se. Like I'm just one part of the operation. Like it's an incredible feat of collaboration, leadership, management. And so getting all that across, above board, and executed, um, they say like it's a miracle that any show gets made or any movie gets made. It's really true. You feel that when you're doing it because
Mm-hmm.
it's that hard. So
Yeah.
it's it is really awesome when you're in the trenches like that and then you come out of it and something works. And
Mm-hmm.
by the way, most things don't work. There's so much content out there, there's so many distractions out there, but when it does work, it's so fulfilling.
Yeah. And what is your favorite part of your job? Is it the entrepreneurial side? Is it like combining the two? Is it producing shows? Like,
Yeah.
what is your favorite part?
I would say the entrepreneurial side of building the vision of supporting creators,
Mm-hmm.
and the creators, I know that word is mostly used for like people who make TikToks and stuff these days,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm meaning anyone who has an ounce in their body for creating some kind of expressive content, whether that means a fictional TV show, a fictional movie, or an unscripted documentary or a podcast. How can I help get you on that level of being seen and making great art or documentary, whatever it is,
Mm-hmm.
and then channeling that into um, the next level, which is like how do we create a legacy for these things where they don't just come and go, but like it's really part of a bigger mission of supporting the arts. So
Mm-hmm.
that's what excites me. The day-to-day minutia of production, I have to say, like is probably not my most favorite,
Mm-hmm.
just because I have all this other stuff going on that I'm responsible for.
Yeah. And because, like you said, so many shows don't do well and aren't successful, what is something from a show that hasn't done as well as you wanted to do that has really helped you on new projects and new shows?
Yeah, I think it's like efficiency, like and
Mm-hmm.
don't get emotional about failures.
Yeah.
I think, I had a show. kind of premiere, and actually premiered quite well, and then kind of dovetailed pretty quickly. And you learn not to take that personally. You just
Mm-hmm.
can't. There's no time for that. You just have to move on. You feel bad for all the collaborators at play, but we're all in it together. We all know coming in like this may not work out, right?
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I think that's really what it is. It's kind of developing your emotional intelligence, no
Mm.
matter what your field is so key to growing as a business leader, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
Like the skills acquisition, things you're learning in high school right now, things you learn in college, the material things, um, it's very easy to base quantitative metrics on that, and like, you could all be at a certain level. Now, the thing that like kind of tips you over the edge is like your emotional intelligence, your leadership intelligence, your management intelligence. The combination of all of that, I think, will breed for better leaders. And I think every Asian business leader, or every business leader, they don't have to be Asian, but like,
Yeah.
that is a quality that you have to kind of recognize and cultivate. It's hard
Yeah.
to until you feel that kind of like failure. So,
Mm-hmm. And what, besides Dave, what has been like a favorite project or experience that you've worked on maybe in the past like 5 years or so?
um, working on one right now, and it's about the fandom of BTS,
Mm.
which if people that are listening don't know, historically biggest kind of boy band in history, artist group, whatever you want to call them, band. But people liken them to the Beatles. But kicker is they are fully Asian. And how amazing is that in an era that we can have that, right?
Mm-hmm.
You might know songs like Dynamite or Butter, right? Um, so it's a really cool project because we don't focus on the band. People, there's enough out there that people know about the band. It
Mm-hmm.
kind of takes the camera, to the opposite side and looks at the fans who are making up, the fandom that drives the popularity of this band, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I've had such a pleasure working on that. I'm working with an Oscar-winning filmmaker, producer, a really lauded filmmaker in Grace Kim and Patty An, and we're going to premiere that in March 2025 at the South by Southwest Film Festival, and
Mm-hmm.
just really, really, really impactful story. Right.
Yeah. And now, as we move on from your career to maybe some challenges or overcoming obstacles you face as an Asian American leader in business,
Yep.
what were some of the unique obstacles you may have faced in your industry?
Unique obstacles, whether they're unique or they are wide spanning, is kind of tough to delineate sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
But honestly, like, especially, I think this is true in any industry. Like, people are there to support you in theory, but that's not always what happens.
Mm-hmm.
Because just by very nature of American capitalism, this is kind of a dog eat dog world. So if there's any chance for promotion or getting ahead of your peer or whatever, like, people are going
Mm-hmm.
to kind of look out for that and kind of take their selfish motivation in front of your motivations, right? That's just
Mm-hmm.
human instinct. That's kind of the natural catalyst of capitalism. And so that all aside, I think the roadblocks has always been convincing someone who is expecting something standard,
Mm-hmm.
me coming in as a non-standard entity and convincing them that I can do the job. And I've encountered that every single step of my career, where it's
Mm-hmm.
like, and that example of, when I met the film chairman, and I was at the time a TV music exec, and he was like, "What are you doing meeting with me?"
Mm-hmm.
And I had to not create, but kind of storytell like what I'm about
Yeah.
authentically. That was an example of like, okay, like, this is why you make sense, like, and I may not have all the bona fides on paper, but this is why I make sense, and this is why I can do a great job for you.
Mm-hmm.
Being able to convince people of that along the way has been, um, a thing. And then, and even on a project specific basis, you're always trying to convince and block and tackle and make sure you get the things that you need to get to make it something successful. So I would say
Mm-hmm.
that.
Yeah. And how do you feel like the music industry specifically or entertainment industry has changed in terms of its diversity and inclusion since you started What progress have you seen, and what challenges still remain?
A ton of progress, which is so amazing, right? Like when I was in
Mm-hmm.
the mailroom, there were some Asians, much less in the executive field when I started out. Um, I may have been the only senior assistant. I may have been the only junior exec at a studio. I may
Mm-hmm.
have been even as of like 8 years ago, one of the only like production company leaders,
Yeah.
And now there's a lot more across the board, which is awesome. There's been a lot of movements toward diversity and not and I know this it gets very political, but I don't think it's a forced issue, right? I think there were programs to help design minorities, but a lot of the people who do exist in these roles today earned it by merit. I really believe that.
Mm-hmm.
The roadblocks we feel now, I still believe like there's a great lack of diversity at the very top, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
do believe the people getting those jobs shouldn't be there and getting those jobs because they have to fill some quota for diversity. I do believe that.
Mm-hmm.
To get to the top, though, you have to have merit, you have to have a track record. And I think it's really fair and justified to say that all the years of hard work that my generation, the generation upcoming, all the work they're doing, they will be legitimate candidates for those roles. And in
Mm-hmm.
those roles, once we have those roles, the type of content that you see out there in the world, music, film, television, it's going to change. And it's going to change to be more inclusive of the medium. Because
Mm-hmm.
you have a lot of non-minority heads right now, who speak a big game, but at the end of the day, they're looking at their own pocketbooks, their own P&Ls, their own shareholder values, and the easier green light is something that they know
Mm-hmm.
versus, oh, I'm gonna step out and make this gamble in an era where risk averse thinking is kind of taking a foot. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and as we finally move on to the final part of the podcast about advice and inspiration, the first question is, what advice would you give to young Asian professionals who aspire to break into higher level business roles and make meaningful contributions to their industries?
yeah, I mean, I think like really hold on to values and mission.
Mm-hmm.
Um, what is it what you want to do? Like dig deep, right? Dig deep and figure out what that is. I personally try to get away from the get rich quick scheme,
Mm-hmm.
um, which a lot of people, by the way, adopt and are very successful doing.
Mm-hmm.
And by that same token, a lot of people I know continue to fail doing that by chasing the next dollar. Oh, it's crypto. Oh, it's AI. Oh, it's this. Oh, it's that.
Mm-hmm.
If you're going to chase AI, like dive in meaningfully. Does it mean something to you? Do you have something to offer there? If
Yeah.
it's just, hey, I'm going to dive in and like I'm going to try to like invest in like these crypto dollars and this Trump meme coin and see if it like blows up to billions and then like cash out. If
Yeah.
that's your plan, it's not going to work out, like
Yeah.
it just isn't. It just isn't. But if there's a bigger meaning to it, oh, I'm going to create this portfolio and like it's going to be balanced with this and that because I know that I may lose right away and but I'm offset by these gains here. Like if it's thoughtful, like that's what I advise. I think also for Asians specifically, and this could come specific to a generational thing with whatever you say about millennials or Gen Z or the generation after that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Entitlement, right? It's like you're going to encounter a lot of, they call them Nepo babies, right? Like children of nepotism, people who've worked in, they're the children of business leaders or children of doctors or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And this sense of like coming into something and you feel like you have a leg up because you already have this base of connections,
Mm-hmm.
right? I think coming in with that mentality always falters the person
Mm.
going, at the heart of it,
Yeah.
because there's always someone who's working harder than you, gaining more speed, who has more hustle than you, who is living at higher stakes. And I know this because I was that guy. I was that
Yeah.
guy. I was not Nepo baby. I had to fight and I had to overcome a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And so knowing that when you're coming into any industry where you're against a lot of people who feel like they are already intrinsically better than you
Mm-hmm.
almost, to me, like you use that as like fuel to like amp you up as someone who can do better and have something to prove. I
Mm-hmm.
do having that. I do feel like having that like something to prove gene other people will call it a sort of chip on the shoulder gene. Really
Hmm.
important.
Yeah. And during challenging times, especially in your industry, what strategies or habits help you stay motivated, focused, and resilient on that right path?
Yeah, I think it's like honestly cohorts, having great colleagues and mentors to lean on.
Hmm. Yeah.
Because otherwise you could feel lost in an island sometimes and often.
Hmm.
And looking at your projects and having conviction in them. Okay, like maybe it's like out of a project slate of 50 in a tough climate, honestly, maybe 43 of them just are really bad. Like, and not bad because they're qualitatively bad, but bad because the marketplace, you can't do anything with them in the marketplace. So you have
Hmm.
these seven great projects, and just do an exercise of reminding yourself why these projects are worth doing and to what end. And then why am I at this job? Like the cohorts, the colleagues, the mission, the mentors. I think a
Yeah.
combination of just really diving deep on that
Hmm.
will help for a healthy mentality in the workplace.
Yeah. And like you mentioned, mentors, like mentorship is often like a key to success, like you said. And did you have a mentor when you were starting out or right now? And if so, like what advice or insights did they give you that had a lasting impact on you?
Yes, I've had mentors all along the way. I always thank them.
Hmm.
They always get my Christmas cards. Um, I have mentors dating back to grade school, even, like
Hmm.
I always value what people older than you and with more experience tell you. Even if you don't adopt their politics or philosophies, they still had an effect on you to a certain effect, right? So, part of learning and growing, I believe, and I'm still learning and growing,
Hmm.
is taking the best parts from every experience, putting them in a pot, and really learning from it. And by the way, this could be negative experiences too, right? Bad
Hmm.
experiences, bad personalities. Internalize that. What is that about? Um, there's no such thing as lost time. It's something I
Hmm.
say a lot. You know,
Yeah.
um, every experience has something to offer,
Hmm.
and that is something each one of my mentors has given me. Um, there's no such thing as wasted time. Like they'll teach me, something specific about a project, and every single of my mentors who have been very successful, and specifically in the business world,
Hmm.
it's follow up and execution. Follow up and execution.
Yeah.
If you really want to distill it, because
Hmm.
there's a lot of dreamers out there. There's a lot of people who are posing. There's a lot of people who are pretending.
Hmm.
Um, but if you can follow up and you can execute, then at least you have something to show for.
Yeah. And as I'm sure you work with a bunch of successful people and like young successful people or maybe not so successful, what are like characteristics of someone or like traits that make them successful in your industry?
I think drive.
Mm.
I think that sense of grind, that great sense of hustle, lack of entitlement, um, that to me really gets people driven and succeeded.
Mm-hmm.
And successful. Like there's some people say charisma or like looks or the ability to jabber and talk glib. Like there are qualities of that are important.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but when you really kind of dig down, a lot of people don't have many of those things.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you kind of march forward when you aren't necessarily the most extroverted?
Yeah.
So in a business world where everyone expects you to be extroverted and you're, part of the business is going to conferences and workshops and like, again, constantly talking all the time. So how
Mm-hmm.
do you reconcile that? How do you work on that for yourself? I
Mm-hmm.
think if you stay core to, okay, I'm doing these things because I need to get this done. I need to get this project done. This is my mission, right? Again, know your values and mission. I need to do this so I can align with my mission and values.
Mm-hmm.
Then you're feeling good.
Yeah, and for the final question, it's kind of in two parts, but if you could go back to the beginning of your career, what's one piece of advice you would give your younger self? And if so, would you change anything also if you went back to the beginning of your career? If so, what is it?
No, I think the first is like just don't to be too hard on yourself.
Mm.
I think there's a lot of like, I don't know, kids go through it, especially like ambitious kids who went to good schools and all this stuff. Like you see your peers, with like iBanking jobs and all this stuff, and just don't be too hard on yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Like try to stay as best as possible. Stick to you, your health, your mental health, your physical health,
Mm-hmm.
your family. Try to keep those grounded as much as you can.
Yeah.
Um, and don't be too hard on yourself because it can
Mm-hmm.
be a really rocky road when you're in the real world, you know? And I was in New
Yeah.
York City, like, and you're seeing like your friends kind of making a ton of money and, in Wall Street and stuff. And you're like, what the hell am I doing? Like,
Mm-hmm.
don't get caught up in that.
Yeah.
It's really hard. It's really hard. And you will probably, everyone gets caught up in a little bit.
Yeah.
But I think mental, emotional intelligence there's nothing more important.
Mm-hmm.
If I were to change anything in my early career, look, I would have liked to get promoted sooner at stuff,
Yeah.
you know? But at the same time, like, and I would have liked to produce movies earlier in my career.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I'm like, I've built a pretty unique background and resume that I can pretty much say it's like singular to me, and I'm pretty happy about that. So
Yeah. All
there's
right.
always something. Grass is always greener, by the way. So
Yeah.
how do you like get away from that mentality, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, Grass is always greener. There's always a better job, or it seems to be a better job. Always
Mm-hmm.
seems to be a better situation, or it seems. Relish in what you're doing. Have your values. Know when to move when it's not right to move. Like when it's right to move.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but don't kind of get caught up in toxicity and all that stuff. Like really focus on yourself as you go along your journey.
Thank you so much for being a guest today on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
It's a pleasure. Thank you, Ben.
Thank you.